Hey everyone, Temporal here, and we are doing some power rankings for the Overwatch Collegiate scene. This is October 17th, as you can see by the date down here, and important thing to note is we just finished up round 6 of Homecoming. For the power rankings here, I'm not going to make you all wait. I will go through this, justify this, go through my sources, but for those who just clicked into the video because you want to see, well, what does Temporal think the power rankings are? As far as the schools that are relevant, that sort of get through what really matters here, I've already put them up here. I will be resetting this and talking through the actual rankings, how we justify it. That's going to be a combination of matchups, what's actually happened this season. That's going to be the most important thing. My sources for that are primarily going to be Homecoming. This is the official collegiate one hosted by Blizzard. Game Battles over here. This is Homecoming. It's going to be this sort of kickoff tournament we had in UGC that was kind of the beginning of the season. Not a ton of teams competed, but we actually got a fair amount of important matchups in here, and we had Northwood, University of Texas Dallas, Bay State, UNT, and Northeastern all competing. So a couple schools that really matter there. We had the Hugh Fest, which was a little more recent and had more meaningful schools attend it. It was an invitational. And then the NACE Star League, which is sort of the main third-party league that is happening in Overwatch as well. If there's more tournaments that I'm not aware of, someone in Collegiate is watching this and going, hey, this is a really important tournament and lots of critical matchups are happening, please let me know in the comments. Reach out to me. I absolutely want to try to make this more accurate with more sources. I know of course, some lands that have happened, some small things, but mostly important matchups haven't happened at them. If there's tournaments like this one where important matchups happened, I definitely do want to know about it. And because we don't quite have enough to fully justify our brackets all the way yet, or justify our tier list all the way yet, there's just not enough. For example, if we look over here, Irvine doesn't have any meaningful wins yet. Utah doesn't really have any meaningful wins yet, so I could completely take them off the board, but that would kind of be silly. Because when we talk about their scrim strength, when we look at the Scrimbucks exchange, when we look at the legacy of what happened last season, how they finished that out, how they've consistently done, it would be silly not to. So we'll look a little bit at legacy and Scrimbucks there, that we'll try to keep that to a minimum. We're just keeping that in there so that our power rankings don't get absolutely blown up in the next week. That said, they should get blown up in the next week anyways, because that's always how it goes in Collegiate, and that's kind of what makes it fun. So, we're coming out through here with our power rankings, and I will deal with chat. Depending on how much we get, I'll deal with it as it comes. If we start getting a lot, I'll only deal with super chats here, but we're mostly going to keep this on pace. So you've seen the power rankings. Again, I had Irvine over here, Utah over here. These are in order, I should point out. So from left to right on each tier, in order, with how these are currently set up, is what I would consider the strength, based on primarily the matches that have actually happened in the tournaments that I referenced here. So I'll go through these and I'll justify them. We'll go ahead and recreate it. So let's go ahead and reset rankings here. I don't really think I need to justify putting Redbirds as the best team in Overwatch. If we look at, in Collegiate Overwatch, they're also the best team in North American contenders. They've beaten Northwood 3-0, Maryville 3-0, and Bay State 3-0. Not really hard to justify putting them in this spot. The next team that's going to be relevant is going to be Northwood. We can see that last year, Northwood actually got second place. They fell to Maryville. If you look at the entirety of the season, though, Northwood beat the other big three players. Northwood, Harrisburg, and Maryville last year would have been the big three players. They could field whole contenders rosters, not necessarily rosters that were all in contenders as teams like Redbirds is now, but they were able to field, their entire team as players that are in or have been in contenders on different teams. Those would have been the big three last year. Northwood beat all the other very good teams throughout the season, multiple cases, ultimately fell to Maryville in the end there. That said, this season, they have gone ahead and beat University of Texas Dallas 3-1, Maryville 3-0, and then beat Maryville again just about an hour or two ago, 2-1 earlier today. So they deserve this second spot ahead of, no real surprise here, Maryville. Maryville, going to have this 3 spot here. We are going to put them in a slightly lower tier. If we had to pick someone to win it all right now, No big surprise that we'd pick this right here. This would be the other potential player. If you talk to them, they think their stock is quite high in terms of their ability to do so. Most of us, I think, would say, hey, no, this is the team. This is the one that's going to do it. Regardless, I'm going to put Northwood in this tier. If anyone's going to go ahead and upset them, I'd say this would be the most likely person to do it. So we've got Maryville here. Maryville did beat Harrisburg 3-0, and they also beat Lords 2-0. Those are probably the most meaningful wins that they've had so far. No big deal. Those aren't super. That's important in that it beats Harrisburg, and Harrisburg is another good team, but Harrisburg is not the next team that we're going to put up here. So maybe this justification feels a little bit light for this third spot since they haven't beat the number 4 team, or even what we're going to put as the number 5 team. But they do have a pretty impressive win here, and probably the most impressive win of some of these other teams. So next we move on to, as well as they were the champions last year. So then we move on to what's not actually a new player on the block. We can move on to University of Texas Dallas, the Comets here. And we see that this team existed last season, but this team has upgraded. They got a top 8 finish. They've upgraded pretty significantly. They look like a very good team now. We can see that they went ahead and they did beat Bay State 3-0, and they also beat Waldorf 3-0. Waldorf is going to be in our top 10 as we saw, so Waldorf, that's something, and then they beat Bay State. And if we look at Bay State is going to be our number 5 team here. So, okay, that's got some meaning. They beat the team that they're right ahead of. That mostly makes sense. Maybe you could go, hey, should it be like this? Should it be like this? Should it be like this? You've got some room for that discussion, but based on the scrim strengths, the legacies, we're going to put them like this for this moment, and I think this is pretty defensible. If you guys disagree, leave comments, hop in the chat, you know the drill. Speaking of which, we got through the top 5 here. I'm going to put one more, and then I'll catch up on chat here. So then we're going to go ahead and put Harrisburg. That shouldn't really surprise anyone. I think we knew that was coming next based on what we had. As soon as I find Harrisburg, there we go. HU Storm. We're going to put them here. They've gone ahead and beat Ohio State 3-1. They lost to Bay State 3-2, so it makes sense for Bay State to be ahead of them here. They did beat Irvine, and then they beat UC Santa Cruz, so a little more support there for their position. So they beat some pretty solid schools. They didn't necessarily beat the very next school. Oh, no, they did actually beat the very next school that we're going to put here in that they beat Irvine. But I would actually consider this to be the next power tier. I would consider, hey, these are the absolute monsters, with this being the most likely champion. But last year we thought Northwood was going to be the champion, and Maryville actually took it. And then this being the people who, hey, if any of these 4 win, no one is going to be shocked, anything like that. Yes, it'll be a shock if Redbirds don't in some way, but if anyone can do it, it's probably these 6 schools would be the ones that people would expect at this point in time. So then we'd move on to the dark horses, but first we see from chat, interesting video topic. I wish Collegiate was easier to follow. I hope to make it a bit easier to follow on this channel. I'm going to do tier lists, not necessarily constantly do tier lists, but I'm going to do a couple tier lists throughout the season, and I'd also like to start talking to people from different programs. Maybe we can get some collegiate following of sorts on this channel, because I think Collegiate is growing. It's getting bigger. It's going to last when Contenders does it. It's getting more and more interesting year after year. I think last year was the first serious year, and this year is going to be even more serious in terms of it being interesting. And I think we can start up sort of the talk show circuit, the interviews, the talk to other programs, coaches, directors, that sorts of things. Maybe get players on to trash talk each other. Maybe we'll do a little bit of that. We'll have to see exactly where we go. Okay, so now we move on to the dark horse teams, as we've labeled them. And here we sort of get into the teams that they could certainly win, but it would be dark horse. I think the name sort of speaks for itself. Irvine and Utah are both going to be up here, and they are the teams that, again, if we go back to previous seasons, were really the only teams to have dethroned any of the big 3 teams, those teams that could field full Contenders rosters. And Irvine has this spot. Irvine doesn't really have anything to support this spot other than legacy and scrim strength, to be perfectly honest. They lost to Harrisburg, but they have wins, of course. If we found them on game battles, we would see that Irvine is Over here, 5-1. They have plenty of wins. None of those wins are really going to be meaningful. And when it comes to any sort of power ranking by this, I don't care that they beat Wayland Baptist University, Gaming Gators at San Francisco State University. None of that actually matters. There's 290 teams in this bracket. This is a Swiss bracket. So what happens is, can you get wins over top 16 teams, top 4 teams, top 32 teams? If you're not getting a win over, say, a top 32 team, really a top 16 team, it just doesn't really matter, and it's not really support for putting you in a position. So they don't really have support for this position. So this may be the first place, other than Maryville, which was a little unsupported to be here versus further down, because Maryville, of course, has a win. They have their win against words are hard. They have their win, or excuse me, anyway, that's the point. Like, I could have moved this one around. But the point that we get to here is they don't have a fantastic holding for this. We're just going to have to kind of believe that they're this good. That said, they may be an interesting team to watch. Are they going to shoot up and be great when they get a good opponent, other than Harrisburg, who they lost to? So they can't really shoot up, I suppose. Or are they going to absolutely collapse because the scene has gotten better this year? And I should point out, the scene has gotten quite a bit better last year. Again, these teams would have been considered the 1, 2, and 3 teams. I know these guys actually won and these guys got second. And they would have sort of been it, with just Irvine and Utah threatening from the outside, maybe Bellevue threatening from the outside. We've added 3 new teams that are real players, including a new King team. So this is interesting. These, not actually a new team, but upgraded. Okay, so moving on, continuing through our dark horses here, we have Irvine. Then we're going to move on to Waldorf, which is actually a new team. Their program didn't exist. They didn't have a team until a week or two before this tournament, which now happened a month ago. So that's pretty cool. They showed up in this tournament. We can see they showed up in this first round here. And they went ahead and found Bay State. Bay State gave them a whooping, a 3-0, so that makes sense why Bay State's ranked higher than them. Then Bay State fell to UT Dallas. We saw that. And then we get to see down here, they went down to the losers bracket. They won their way off against UC Berkeley. Bye, Berkeley. Good school. Not a good Overwatch team. Not yet, anyways. Then they found Northeastern University, which I am the coach for, full disclosure, and they did take Northeastern down 3-2. I think we would win that match if we ran into them again, but I'm not going to let my bias creep into this. And then they went ahead and found Bay State again, and they did eke out a 3-2 revenge win there. So this would have been the next day. This was a tournament that took place over 2 days, and after getting 3-0'd in the previous day, they won in the second day before getting eliminated by University of Texas Dallas. So some of you may be going, wait, the more recent matchup, is this is a win against Bay State, so they should be up here ahead of Bay State? I have to be honest, Waldorf is a good school. Waldorf belongs in the top 10 in Overwatch. I have scrimmed against both of these teams, Bay State and Waldorf, and I know it's Scrimbucks and all that and everything of the sort, but other than that one win against Bay State, which Bay State also has the other direction the day before, including their scrim strength, including what we've actually seen in terms of Bay State getting other meaningful wins, such as beating Harrisburg, things like that, this does feel like the right place for Waldorf. Could Waldorf be over here? Sure. Could Waldorf be up here? Really doesn't feel like it, but I look forward to being proven wrong in this category. That said, fresh program, absolutely awesome to see them in the top 10 here. And I look forward to them seeing this and going, Temporal, what are you talking about? We're great. And then going on and stomping on the rest of the tournament. If we do look at them in the homecoming matchup right now, they are currently 6-0, which is great for them, and they are holding up this position on our power rankings based on beating Lords 3-0, the Bay State back and forth that we talked about, that Northeastern win, and then beating up on University of Washington, who are now 4-2, but we can see that one of their losses, of course, to them, and University of Washington did get a top 16 finish last year. So they've got some hold up to what they're looking at in this position, including the Bay State back and forth that we're looking at. Okay, so there we go. And now we're going to move on to team number 9. And team number 9 is a somewhat frustrating team. And this is Miami, Ohio. And I call them frustrating because they like to ruin power rankings. Miami, Ohio has two different versions. They have a version that's a good, like, I don't know, 4.4 level team, 4.3 level team. Fine, they'll play well, they'll do what you'd expect. And then they have a version that they just feel like turning on sometimes, which is why they're in the top 10 here. They went ahead and they just beat Utah. And for those of you who aren't aware, again, Utah has a history of being a very good Overwatch school. You'll see last year, even though they were top 8, not top 4, they actually took a map off Maryville. UC Irvine was not able to do that before getting eliminated, so Utah probably actually has the better record in terms of how we look at that last year. But Miami, Ohio did beat Utah. These two have had some back and forth over previous seasons. Miami, Ohio, when they want to be good, are good. On the other hand, Miami, Ohio also lost to Lords 3-0. So Miami, Ohio lost to Lords, who isn't up on the board yet, but then beat Utah. Making it a little tough. Waldorf also beat Lords. We covered that. Speaking of which, okay, this is a lot of talk about beating Lords, so surely I'm going to go put Lords up on the... No, I'm not putting Lords up on the board yet. Okay, Utah is another one where they don't really have a ton of justification to hold here in this 10th spot, other than the fact that it just doesn't make sense to put them lower. This is mostly them sitting here on scrim strength. Their most meaningful win is probably against Boulder. Boulder here. Boulder's fine. They're good. They're not going to make it into the top 10, obviously. They wouldn't make it into the top 16. Probably wouldn't make it into the top 20 here. So it's a fine school. It's a good program in terms of, hey, they have a solid Overwatch team, but they don't have much that's holding up this Utah ranking. So again, I expect objections here. This is relying somewhat on legacy and somewhat on scrim strength. Okay, now we move on to the next tier. And as we move on to this next tier, we are going to start with Boise, assuming I can find them. Boise. Boise have a win over St. Thomas. As best I can tell, someone from St. Thomas reach out and tell me otherwise. St. Thomas does not look like they are registered for homecoming, so they're choosing not to participate in homecoming. They did, however, participate in HughFest, and it's important that Boise got a 3-1 win over them. That's pretty solid. The reason that that's going to be pretty solid is St. Thomas, who I do have here, beat Bellevue. For those of you that don't remember, Bellevue got the 3 seed last year, worked their way through. They do have Rob 420 on their team, for example. They are a pretty solid team, a couple serious players that would be well recognized there. They did ultimately go down to UC Irvine. That's how UC Irvine made it through to top 4, but they did have that 3 seed last season by earning it in last season's equivalent of this Swiss bracket. So it's surprising to not have them in our top 10 or right outside of our top 10. They're not, and the reason they're not is that loss that they took to St. Thomas, who now seems to not be in here. But hey, that's how it goes sometimes. Boise did then beat St. Thomas, so we're going to go with that. Next, I'm going to put Northeastern. This is the team I coach for. This is pretty well sustained, though. As we look at this in terms of why Northeastern is here, they lost to Waldorf 3-2. That's an important matchup we know about there. Obviously, it's a loss, so it doesn't help them. They lost to Northwood twice, and those are their losses this season. Their wins, as we get into them, they did beat North Texas. North Texas, we can see last season finished top 16. They had to beat out SCAD to do it, then went down to Harrisburg. So they did that top 16 last year. I don't think they'll finish that highly this year, at least based on what we have in our rankings so far, but they've got 2 wins against North Texas, and then they did 2-0 Lords this weekend. And Lords is our next opponent, he is our next school here. So Lords, we're putting them next in the power rankings. Not too wild. They beat Miami, Ohio again, so they beat this school that we have in the 9 slot here. So that's going to be meaningful there. They then went ahead and lost to Waldorf 3-0, Maryville 2-0, Northeastern 2-0, and then they beat Penn State. Penn State is going to be down here in our support group. They're not going to make sort of the meaningful portion of our tier list, but they are down here in this. These are solid teams. These are, not just like flat 4K teams, but like actual high-level GM teams that play. Okay, then from Lords, we are going to move on to Waterloo. Some of you may remember the Waterloo memes and such that happened in early Owl when we had certain teams that couldn't put together a single win, and there were jokes that some of the best collegiate teams could beat them. And at that time, though that was years ago, Waterloo, who I'm stalling as I try to find, here we go, was one of those teams. Waterloo has since not really been one of those teams. You're noticing we're not seeing Waterloo last season in our top 16, in our top 32 here. Not really seeing that. But Waterloo ends up on our tier list where they do here in our power rankings because they got the win over Ohio State. Speaking of Ohio State will be next. Ohio State lost to Waterloo, they beat Pennsylvania State, and they beat Akron. So not anything in terms of like super impressive, oh my goodness, that's amazing. They haven't punched up and beat anyone that's above them on this tier list, but they have beat a couple meaningful teams down in this lower levels. And then we've got Scrim Strength to go on as well for this. After that, we're going to go ahead and put St. Thomas. It's a little weird putting St. Thomas on our power list when I don't actually think they're in the homecoming tournament. But this is not specifically how are they in homecoming? This is how are they in collegiate Overwatch this season? And collegiate Overwatch, as we can see, takes place across multiple tournaments. And they made, they put that out there, worth threatening in HughFest here. And they were threatening in the form that they beat Bellevue and they beat Bellevue 3-1. And again, Bellevue did quite nicely last year. We're going to put Bellevue up in the next slot here. It's very surprising to see Bellevue this low. Again, we talked about that. That surprised me, but it is what the tier list justifies right now. So this is what I consider the meaningful portion of the power rankings. If people disagree, absolutely comment down below. Call me a fool. Tell me about tournaments that I didn't pay attention to, wasn't aware of. Tell me about, no, in our Scrimbuck exchange, we're so much better than this other team. We try not to put too much weight on the Scrimbuck exchange, and I'm definitely not going to put a ton of weight on what's happening in your scrims when it's like second hand like that. Definitely not going to do a ton of that. In fact, we'd like to factor them out entirely. We just can't do so yet because we haven't had quite enough matches yet. But that's part of what makes it fun. And then as we get into sort of the solid teams thing here, I'm going to put these teams in order for this last category in terms of there shouldn't be anything where I'm putting a team vastly above or below a team that doesn't make sense. Their order should be right, but I would not be remotely surprised if there are more teams that are better than these teams that didn't make it onto my list here. These teams are mostly here because, hey, they were meaningful from here. They were meaningful from these teams in terms of we needed the support to go, hey, what are your wins? What are your losses? And we needed to find wins that were against teams that were reasonable enough to offer any support for their spots. Not like, oh, I need to justify this, but we actually are trying to build down, and we did build this mostly top to bottom. And then once you find some of these teams, you go, okay, how are we finding this? How are we putting this? Should Ohio State be way over here? That sort of thing. Should Irvine be way down here? Again, Irvine could be down here if we wanted to. Utah could be down here, but that just wouldn't be silly, so we had to find things like that to give support. So these should roughly be in order, but I look forward to seeing these change. I look forward to seeing other teams work their way in here as the season goes on. We'll throw UC Santa Cruz up here because they're banana slugs. That's an awesome mascot. They do have a loss to Harrisburg 2-0. No meaningful wins. Still going to put them there somewhat based on strength. Similar to Winthrop, really nothing meaningful in terms of matchups there, but we'll go with it. Then we've got Boulder here. We put them in here. We already talked about the meaningful match was the loss to Utah there. We're going to go University of Washington. They were top 16 last year. They have this weekend picked up losses to Waldorf and Bellevue. So we've got Bellevue over here, Waldorf over here. Let's go ahead and move on from there to SCAD Esports. And then we've got Converse. And Let's see. SCAD has wins against Converse and North Texas. Here's Converse. Here's North Texas. We're going to go ahead and go like that. Let's get Pennsylvania State in here. Pennsylvania State lost to Ohio 3-1, and also, so Ohio State 3-1, and also lost to Lords. And then as we move on, we're going to have OU Crimson. Let's get Rutgers in here. They've got a win against Illinois Orange and Harrisburg. Excuse me. They have a win against Illinois Orange and a loss to Harrisburg. Win against this Illinois Orange is the next school that we are putting in here, who are a little interesting in that they beat University of Florida. They beat Mizzou. I don't think Mizzou has their what was formerly their strongest player anymore, so that's not as impressive. We need to pull that down. And then we're going to have Akron, and we'll throw that up there as well, who have a loss to Ohio State and the loss to Illinois Orange. So again, I wouldn't really consider this. There's many more teams we could put in this solid team list. I would not be surprised at all if these teams jump around a lot down here. I think these first four categories are the more interesting portion of the list, but we have these down here to give us some of our links. So that's sort of what I wanted to go through, what I wanted to talk about in terms of the power rankings. We showed you a little bit into the history of collegiate Overwatch as well here, at least the previous season. We see some of that. And then these are the teams that you could look forward to and say, hey, this is how they are. You can start to craft your storylines and get interesting things like that. If this type of content is interesting to you and you want to see more collegiate Overwatch stuff, please do drop a like. Consider subscribing if you're not, but also comment. Like on this channel, I've followed some of Northeastern's matches. We have some of that history here. You can take a look at that. That's fun and interesting. But if you want to see more general collegiate stuff, more stuff like this, maybe talking to other teams, having them on for talk show type things like that, interviews, or just more power rankings and the like, please, by all means, let me know that in the comments as it helps direct where I send my content. Okay, let me do a final catch up on chat here, and then I think we can call this one. Keep it short and sweet. Okay. Last year, who did we go down to, blah? Last year, I was doing coaching. I started coaching for Northeastern midseason last year, and we went down to, or last season, and we went down to Bellevue, as you can see. And if we look at Bellevue, we can look at them here. Bellevue has Vita Coco, who I've worked with before, good player. They also have Rob Depp. So those are very recognizable names there. We'll see how things continue here. It's not like these are nobody names either. Like, this is a threatening, scary school. I would not at all be surprised to see them move up the power rankings. I just can't justify it because they're literally being bottlenecked by the St. Thomas loss here. So that's what we're going to look at. Okay, we'll go ahead and call it there, and I will see you guys in the next one. Thanks.